In this video, I'm going to identify a really limiting belief, a really detrimental meme or mind virus that you may or may not be afflicted with right now, and you might even be totally unaware of it, but you might not be experiencing the results that you want to experience because of it. So the title I've given this mind virus is kind of a false duality consciousness. So I know that title is not really descriptive, not really illustrative, so here's an example. So let's say you're someone who is coming into a healthier lifestyle, healthier diet, healthier habits, etc. So what often happens and what tends to happen and is very obvious if you go to forums, message boards, or any kind of social event, potluck gathering, whatever, what often ends up happening is these so-called people who are interested in health, who are gathering to talk about health, spend most of their time talking about how these other people over there are unhealthy. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that it's not very healthy to talk about how unhealthy other people are. And it's ultimately self-defeating, contradictive, and hypocritical, and self-limiting, self-harming, and just on and on and on with the negative consequences. Not only is it annoying and just silly and a waste of time also, but that's just kind of my personal opinion on that. So that's kind of the health example. It's not very healthy to talk about how unhealthy other people are. Another example would be this so-called consciousness movement of people who get into meditation or spiritual texts or personal growth and personal development and what have you. So they gather around, they get on message boards and forums and YouTube and have meetings and conferences, things like that. And oftentimes the conversation goes to how unconscious the other group is, or how unconscious this person is, or how unconscious all of these other people are, groups, individuals, organizations, corporations, companies, businesses, etc. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not very conscious to talk about how unconscious other people are. Because ultimately, if you were really conscious, you would see how futile making those distinctions are, and you would understand that things have their right place. You would understand that there are tall people and short people. Short people aren't supposed to be tall, tall people aren't supposed to be short. You'll understand that there are, multiple seasons, and summer isn't supposed to be winter, winter isn't supposed to be summer. Each one is different, each one has its place and its purpose and its appropriate role in the whole spectrum of reality. So for you to come in and say, you know what, I really like autumn. Autumn is my favorite time of year, and I think all of the seasons should be autumn, and summer is wrong because it's not autumn, winter is wrong because it's not autumn. It's just absurd and silly and ultimately a waste of time. But it's very common and it often ends up happening more often than not. And if you don't believe me, go look at forums and go look at message boards, go look at social events, social gatherings in any of these kinds of situation or contexts. Another example would be people who are, trying to be very non-judgmental, trying to be very open and open-hearted in their heart chakra, or whatever language we're using to describe that whole paradigm. But what often ends up happening is these people end up judging other people for being judgmental, and ultimately, ostracize or point the finger at other people for pointing the finger at them, which ultimately is self-defeating and a waste of time and contradictory to whatever paradigm they're trying to promote. So hopefully from these examples you can understand the deeper teaching of what's going on here and the deeper futility of taking on this I'm this, you're that, I'm better than you, and you're wrong, I'm right, that whole conversation. And ultimately the deeper teaching is this thing of projection. So what all of these groups are doing is they're saying, this is this over here, and this is that over here. This is good, this is bad. I belong over here, you belong over there. And of course, these distinctions are essential and useful to make because, reality is a story, reality is linguistic, and we need to, cut things up into pieces so we can talk about them, have a conversation about them. But that ultimately, getting so caught up in that conversation that you forget that fact is what often happens and is ultimately self-defeating and a massive hindrance for true growth, true consciousness, and true just energetic expansion. So then what happens to get back to projection is that a person says, okay, I'm going to be healthy, or I'm going to be more conscious, or I'm going to be less judgmental. But ultimately, all of those choices arise out of the awareness of all of those things being present within the person. So what I mean is a person chooses to be healthier because they recognize their own ill health or disease or imbalance. A person chooses to be more conscious because they realize they're very unconscious and they have a lot of parts of themselves they don't really like. A person desires to be less judgmental and more open-hearted because they realize that they're very judgmental and very closed-hearted. So rather than taking all of those realizations and sitting down, shutting up, looking in the mirror, going inside, doing the work, and actually facing all of those things, what they do is say, oh, well, I'm good because I eat this, I do this exercise, I do this thing, but you're bad because you do all of those things, failing to realize that both of those things are taking place in here and in here. So this idea of pointing the finger at someone else is just this person failing to actually acknowledge that part of themselves, and they're putting it onto someone else, which you might think, well, so what? But the problem with that is that takes self-responsibility and ultimately self-empowerment and just throws it away and gives it away to this other person. And it's just a waste of time, and it's just annoying because, you know, if you're a person like me who's interested in learning and growing and changing and evolving, and you've been to these things and you've been in these conversations, and it all ultimately goes to, well, so-and-so over here is worse than us or below than us, or so-and-so is unconscious. It's just frustrating and annoying. So that's why I wanted to bring all of these things up, because if you're watching these videos, you're probably interested in those things. You probably are in these communities, and you probably most likely have seen these kinds of conversations and maybe even bought into them and been trapped by them. So I wanted to bring this up for your awareness so you can see, oh, maybe I've been doing that. Ultimately, so you can stop. Ultimately, not because you're bad or you're wrong or I'm better than you or you're worse than me or you're better than me. None of that stuff. But just so ultimately you can take that energy, take that time, get it back, and use it for things that are more positive, more conducive, and more self-serving, and more effective, actually getting you what you want to get, but also more effective for the people around you, the people you're dealing with, and ultimately just get rid of this whole false duality, projectionist kind of a consciousness, which is not only harming you, not only annoying you, but also the people around you, the people you deal with, which is ultimately why it's so important. Because what you do, what you say, what you think, what you feel doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone you come in contact with, everyone you communicate with, etc. So, if you have any questions or comments, post them below, and I'll talk to you soon.